Well, hello everyone, and welcome back to a brand new installment in our Worst to Best Boss series. If you missed part 1, make sure you double back and check that out, because if you're wondering where some of those characters might be, they were either in last week's video or they will be in the concluding video that happens a week from today. So I will include the link to both of those videos when everything is fully released in the description of today's video for your convenience. So today will be the middle of the road. This will be the mid-tier class of boss fights, and we will be going through them the same way that we did last week, where we work our way up the list, getting better and better as the boss fights continue. Now, as a general reminder, as we do every single video, make sure you check to see if you are subscribed to the channel. If you are not, please take a moment and fix that for me, as that subscription is free and easy, and I bring videos to you every single day. And don't forget to leave a like on today's video if you find it helpful and or enjoyable. So without further ado, let's talk about the mid-tier boss fights. Rounding out the bottom of mid-tier at spot number 26, we have Kingpin. And Kingpin is an interesting fight. He hits kind of hard, can knock you around a little bit and be a general nuisance. But once you know what to look for, he really doesn't become that difficult. The biggest things that you'll need to watch for are his sumo stamps before he runs into a charge, and then finally in the second phase of the fight when he walks over to the large pillars that are around the conference room that he's just blown the ceiling off of, as he will rip those out of the ground and then swing them around wildly before hucking them across the battlefield. Those are really the two big things that you'll need to watch out for. The minor nuisance that he has of the projectiles that he shoots out of the end of his cane can be a mild inconvenience as well, especially if you're trying to initiate a synergy or ability type attack that has a bit of a longer startup to it. But other than that, those are really the items that you need to be concerned about with Kingpin, and he did just barely escape the low-tier boss fights within the scope of the series. Coming in at spot number 25, we have Ronin, and Ronin is up here for a very similar reason to why Kingpin is here, and it's due to the fact that he hits very, very hard. There are a lot of attacks that Ronin throws out that cannot be blocked, and that's intentional, as Ronin is meant to be a character that tests your limits as to what you've learned from the tutorial so far and sets you up for success in later installments and fights that you get involved in. Now, the biggest thing that gives Ronin the edge in this fight is it involves a lot more tactical rolling, especially when he gets into phase 2, where he has his power lightning strikes that just go all across the battlefield. You really need to make sure that you are familiar with and able to routinely execute rolls and dodges by the time you get to the fight here against Ronin, if you want to get out there in a relatively painless state, especially if you are running the game from a new game perspective. Of course, the fight does get a little bit easier when you have higher level characters, but it is an overall challenge in any circumstance. But it is a challenging fight in any circumstance which you are confronted with it. Moving up to spot number 24 on our list, we have Elektra. And the reason that this fight is up here in this spot is it has a couple more annoying nuisance type elements to it, specifically with the hand mystics that show up. Because the hand mystics, more particularly the ones that she siphons off of to kind of bolster her own longevity in the first phase of that fight, they have a nasty habit of throwing out attacks that will slow down the movement of your characters. And yes, you can roll out of those to get out of them a little bit easier, but it is annoying nonetheless and adds an aspect of annoyance to this fight. She also has a bit more resilience when it comes to being staggered out, and can be a little bit tricky to get in on. I find myself missing the synergy attacks to force the lengthened stun timer with this fight a bit more routinely with some of the others, but it's still not enough to bolster her any up higher on this list, as she does have a relatively low health pool once you get her into that second stage of her fight. Spot number 23 on our list, goes to Ebony Maw. And this is kind of an odd placement because he ranks far lower on this list than any of his Black Order counterparts. And that's because he is very underwhelming. He's not a strong boss character by any right. Really, the big attack that causes annoyance and nuisances for him is the attack that he's only prone to doing once you get him into the second phase of the fight, where he summons the large clusters of rocks and kind of throws them down onto the battlefield. But you've seen this mechanic before with fights such as the Infinity Sentinel, where it's very clearly telegraphed where those attacks are going to land, and it gives you plenty of time to plan accordingly and get out of the way. And most of the area towards the top end of the battlefield is safe from those blasts anyway, so if you just kind of make your way up to the top edge, then you should be able to avoid his onslaught when he gets to that phase. And apart from that, he's up here because he is a little bit more difficult, as he is intended as an endgame boss fight, but there's very clear reasons as to why he is down as this low on this list. Spot number 22 goes to Sandman. And Sandman, well, he is the reality check for a lot of new players, because it introduces niche battle mechanics, specifically with the suppression cannons that are present within his cell. You're not going to deal any sort of meaningful damage to him unless you suppress him down with the use of those cannons. He also hits very hard and has a couple of attacks that, especially for new game players, will one-shot you if you get caught in the wrong spot, specifically the large sand hammer that he brings down right in front of himself. Yeah, it will cause you to kind of get stuck in a earthquake type animation for a couple of seconds. You can roll through that shockwave if you time it just correctly to get away from that completely. You can also roll away from the onslaughts that he sends out to try and keep you off of the suppression cannons. But again, it's very much a reality check with just how well adept are you with the introductory mechanics. Spot number 21 on this list goes to Mysterio. And Mysterio, he is quite annoying, especially from that new game perspective, because there are a couple of attacks that he throws out that really make things quite annoying. And the first phase of this fight, even though it's not with Mysterio specifically, it still sets up into the confrontation with him. And that is, of course, the combat that you have against Spider-Gwen, Miss Marvel, and Miles Morales. And the biggest problem here is you've got three very powerful, wide-range hitting characters that take up a lot of ground and also have a couple of attacks that will further inconvenience you. Specifically, Miles Morales has his Elektra web that he sends out across the battlefield in kind of a straight line, where he will either bisect it or it just kind of cause mayhem for the members of your team. So even before Mysterio makes his appearance, those mechanics are already testing some of your spatial awareness of this fight and this combat. And then once Mysterio shows up, especially once you get him into later stages of his fight, he has a couple of moves that are really quite annoying. He has a mist that he will throw out that not only slows you, but will deal some damage while you are stuck in there, and you'll just need to roll out of that if you get caught in it trying to execute any type of attack animation. It's not going to work out for you at all. And that is one of my least favorite mechanics that are introduced within the game, and fortunately, you only see that here in the Mysterio fight and then later on in the story quest with the AIM soldiers. But the other big attack that really kind of gives you a reality check with this fight is the attack where he creates multiple different shadow clones around the arena, and you have to discover the correct version of Mysterio and completely deplete his stagger bar, which if you just staggered him out before he has a chance to recharge that, you are going to get caught up in a vortex that consumes the entire arena. There is no way to run away from that. Fortunately, he doesn't break out that attack very frequently, and you more often than not have an opportunity to stagger him out and prevent him from detonating that attack. But those elements specifically is what bolsters him up higher on this list. Spot number 20 goes to Magneto, and specifically the Magneto solo fight, because we'll talk about in due time the initial confrontation that you have with Magneto, but this is the fight where you are meant to win him over and kind of sway his opinion against the Black Order. So he still does not let up. He has the Power Stone at his disposal and takes up large amounts of space, as well as summoning in Sentinels that you're likely not going to be able to take out all 3 of them. 1 or 2 of them is going to explode, and you need to make sure that you're away from that when it does detonate. However, that is kind of his downfall and what keeps him from going up any higher on this list, because those same Sentinels, if you do defeat 1 or 2 of them, you can then take that core and throw it into Magneto to just reap massive damage out of him and help yourself speed through that fight a little bit more quickly and efficiently. But Magneto's powerful attacks, many of which can't be rolled out of if you get caught in the longer chain type attacks, is really what cements Magneto in the top half of not only this list, but the boss fights as a whole. Spot number 19 goes to Ultron. And Ultron is one of the characters that has my overall least favorite mechanic, and that is the confusion that comes along with the Mind Stone. And there are instances where you really can't avoid it, especially if you're a new player. You can kind of get to the point where you're aware of what's going on and can prevent any sort of adverse effects from that. It is avoidable, but if you get stuck with the inverted controls, it really kind of ruins your day and makes the fight slog through a little bit slower than it otherwise normally would. He also has a tendency to just kind of exit the battlefield completely and send in a bunch of his drones after you to kind of finish you off, or again, test some of your finer movement and evasion skills, which you can do either by jumping around the beams that come into place or rolling out of them, or analyzing the telegraphed pattern that is sent out, which 1 or 2 or possibly all 3 of the NPCs in your party is going to end up rolling into those attacks and taking some damage. There's just not a way to get the entire crew to avoid taking any sort of damage from those types of attacks. And the last one, which really kind of makes things pretty annoying with this fight, is the attack where he goes into his kind of his gyro laser, where he emits laser blasts from both of his palms while he slowly spins around in a circle. And that can really kind of put a damper on the fight as well, which is what earns him spot number 19 on the list. Spot number 18 on the list goes to MODOK. He has a lot of similar attributes that Ultron does, which is why he goes up here, but he also has a couple of additional quirks. One of them is, this is by far the biggest arena that you fight a boss in, and there's not a whole lot of places to hide from any of his oncoming attacks. But not only that, as MODOK is engaging in combat, he will frequently execute an attack that sends him rocketing across to the other side of the battlefield. And due to the decreased efficiency that most projectile characters have within your party, there's just not a reason for you to have them, and even if you do, they deal meaningless damage as they're a part of the party. And then you've got to spend some time tracking down the adversary on foot as you make your way over to the other side of the arena. So that really is what kind of makes things annoying. Also, the fact that he has access to the Soul Stone and can, in very minor scales, heal himself back up in the middle of combat doesn't make things any more fun. So that's kind of why MODOK is a nuisance, and he has access to other attacks that will hit you from the other side of the arena once he has chased off to the opposite side of where you were just conducting combat, in addition to some more of that green mist staggering field, which I just don't care for whatsoever. Spot number 17 on this list goes to Claw. And Claw is annoying for a multitude of different reasons, primarily due to the fact that all of his attacks are sonic based. And that is going to knock you out of whatever attacks that you're trying to execute on him. He also, in the second phase of his fight, he just kind of rockets around the battlefield, or his sonic attacks rocket around the battlefield, and he does as well. This can be a very devastating run for new games if you are not familiar with calculating or making your way around the trajectories that Claw unleashes as he is roaming around that arena. And he's just not a whole lot of fun to deal with. He flashes in and out of existence around the battlefield periodically, and when he is in that ricocheting type attack, he is completely invincible, where there are a lot of those attacks that are executed by other opponents that you can kind of get some damage into them, or at least get a better handle on where they're going to be. Claw, you don't have that many luxuries, so you've really got to make sure that you're on top of your spatial awareness and can get out of the way of any of the attacks that he may throw at you at any given time. Spot number 16 on the list goes to Doctor Doom, specifically the introductory fight at the beginning of the Shadow of Doom story quest. Because, yeah, Doctor Doom definitely is a more difficult boss fight when you run into him again later, but here as a general introduction, he still hits very hard and summons in a lot of Doom bots to do his dirty work. That being said, you can get in on him and make some decent headway with the fight, and it's a lot easier to bust him out of the central attack that he does with his Doom bots and the laser grid. But if you're trying to execute this fight fresh off of the main story quest, if you purchase the DLC and making your way into this after completing New Game just once, this fight's going to set you back because he hits very, very hard, and you likely don't have a team that's quite up to par with where they need to be in order to truly confront him and take him down. Spot number 15 on the list also goes to an adversary within the Shadow of Doom DLC, and that is a Nihilist. And Nihilist is up here because he has a couple of quirks that really kind of will ruin your day. He has an attack that will latch onto you and deal large amounts of damage before throwing you down onto the ground and sending you spiraling away. So that's not fun to get caught up in. He has attacks that will decrease your team's defense, and that's not fun, especially if he then combos that into some of his other attacks. He will completely dismiss himself from the battlefield periodically and rocket across the area or the arena of combat, which really isn't nice or considerate whatsoever. He has a lot of large hitting hitboxes that he detonates, but perhaps the most infuriating aspect of the fight with Nihilist is the fact that he can self-heal. And he doesn't do it very frequently, and as long as you're aware of what he's doing, you can counteract it. But I've said this in a couple of other videos, the only way to counteract the healing is to use the antimatter crystal, but that also adversely affects the members of your team, whether you have masteries that allow periodic self-healing, or if you have the healing mechanic based off of damage dealt from extreme attacks or damage dealt to opponents that are staggered and completely stunned. Those will be adversely affected if any of those characters that are trying to heal by executing those moves are found within the realm of that antimatter, and the antimatter lingers for a little bit. It doesn't go away once the Nihilist has completed his own auto heal, so you do need to be cautious with that. And yeah, please do use it when you have to, because you're going to be stuck in that fight for a while if a Nihilist is just using that regen ability over and over again. But it is something to take into consideration. And spot number 14, otherwise known as the top level of the mid-tier boss fights, is probably one you weren't expecting. It's Thanos. And yes, Thanos is a very big endgame boss, and he hits very hard, but he also heavily telegraphs his attacks. So you can get around them very, very easily. The one exception to that is when he freezes you in place, but as long as you are aware of what the hitboxes are looking like from the attacks that he's summoning while your team is under the effect of the Time Stone, you can make your way around it, you can get away from it, and you can then counterattack and deal massive amounts of damage to him and get through that fight a lot quicker. You would think that Thanos would be a lot higher on this list, but there are other boss fights that just completely outclass him. in multiple different ways. And that is what we are going to get into with our video and conclusion of this series next week. So if you've enjoyed today's video, please feel free to give it a like, as that greatly helps me out and helps YouTube's algorithm communicate to others that are interested in this game that this is a video worth their time, and I certainly do hope that it has been. Once again, make sure that you are subscribed to the channel, and if you are, thank you so very, very much, as we are well on our way to that 600 subscriber milestone, and you'll get a notification if you ring that bell when the conclusion of this series is posted in a week's time. So thanks again for letting me take a moment of your time, and I hope that you have an absolutely fantastic rest of your day.